Hey, it's Joshua here with another edition of Mortgage Clarity, and I have Kevin Reimer with Goosehead Insurance back here on video. We were talking here last week about some just general flood and homeowners insurance, and through that conversation we kind of touched on flood, but we knew that we needed a video just for flood insurance because there's a lot to this. And again, I was talking with Kevin off camera, and it's like this could be an hour-long video, and we're not going to do that to you. So we're going to go real high level here. But it's something that's really, I know for my clients when they're looking at buying homes, a property flood insurance can have major impacts to that payment, and also as well as to the value of that property in the future as flood insurance costs and stuff go up. So I figured, Kevin, you know most about flood insurance more than I do. How about talk a little bit about, again, what is flood insurance, when is it required, and maybe, you know, what people here don't know about is there's different zones, and those zones impact. So talk to me about flood insurance.
All right, so I guess we could start with the definition of flood. I mean, you can go to FEMA's website and look for the definition, but the definition of a flood is basically an outside source of water affecting 2 or more acres. So if you're living outside of town a little bit, you know, and you don't have neighbors, you know, 2 or more acres, or 2 or more pieces of property. So if you're in town, you know, it could be you and 2 of your neighbors. If an outside source of water is impacting you and a couple neighbors, that could typically be defined as a flood. So it could even be a fire hydrant up the street that somebody hits, runs over, fire hydrant floods the street and impacts 5 of your neighbors and you. You know, your normal homeowners insurance policy would not cover a situation like that, but that's where you would technically need flood insurance. So
okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, so a couple, you know, just basic definition. When you'll need it. Now there's a ton of different zones here in this area, kind of Willamette Valley area. The most popular ones are going to be A, AE. X means you're not in a flood zone.
So X is good.
X is good. But when you refer somebody over to me, we'll run a flood zone determination, which you probably have done already. Yep. So then it's like, hey, we're going to need to look some options because they're in a flood zone. So premiums vary greatly. You know, there's options of going through FEMA, through the National Flood Insurance Program. There are private insurers that we have access to that
Which, correct me if I'm wrong, that private insurance is fairly new. I think when I first got in this business like 18 years ago, it was almost always FEMA.
Right. Private insurers have been coming into the industry.
Okay. Is that a good thing?
I think, it's a great thing. More competition, right?
Okay, yeah.
Brings that price down a little bit.
One single source. Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. And now, you know, just recently, FHA loans are now accepting private flood insurance carriers as well. So again, they used to have to go through the National Flood Insurance Program, but now they are accepting private flood insurance carriers as well. So that's good. But depending on which zone you're in, that's going to impact rate. Depending, obviously, how much coverage you need. You know, 950 square foot home is going to need less coverage than a 3,000 square foot home. You know, just like typical home insurance policies. You know, the more coverage you have, the more premium it's going to be, that kind of thing. So, and then, you know, if you are in a flood zone, the lender will require flood insurance. If they're loaning you money, they are going to require that if you're in a flood zone that you need flood insurance. Now, if somebody has paid off their home and they don't want it, that is their prerogative. They don't have to get it. So, but as long as there's a loan on that piece of property and they're in a flood zone, they'll be required by the lender to have flood insurance.
So let me ask you, so we talked about, you have different flood zones. You have A, AE, whatever. I imagine these different zones have different cost for the insurance.
Yeah,
so
it kind of measures risk.
How does it go from like best to, I mean, X is best. What's worst?
You're putting me on spot. I think AE is a higher cost than A. I could have those backwards, but yeah, just depending on which zone they're in, it kind of associated with risk and
which has to do with, like, you know, there's the 100-year floodplain, the 50-year floodplain,
how close you are to the river or whatever, and the chances of you flooding,
so
that kind of thing.
So what if I have a property and I'm on like a hill and there's a river in the background and the hill slopes down? So my property in the back is actually in a flood zone, but does that mean just because a portion of my property is in the flood zone that I have to have flood insurance, or is there, does my actual improvements to the property have to be in the flood zone?
Yeah, so typically if a building is not in the flood zone, they can get away with not requiring it. I think, I've seen some lenders, again, it kind of comes back to you guys and the lender on what they're requiring, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's elevation certificates that are floating out there too that some people can get. I know that if somebody is in a flood zone, they feel they shouldn't be in a flood zone. We talked about a person that a corner of their home is in the flood zone, right?
Yes.
So in a situation like that, you can pay a surveyor to go out there and determine if your home is in a flood zone or not. And if they say no, you can apply through FEMA for it's called a letter of map amendment, a LOMA.
Okay.
So you can get that through FEMA, and then if you get the LOMA and it says the LOMA is you're in a flood zone X, which means you're not in a flood zone anymore, then you can pass that on to the lender, and the lender should, in theory, say, okay, we're not going to require your flood insurance anymore.
Right.
However, you can also pay $800, $1,000, $1,200, whatever it is for a survey. They find that you're still in the flood zone, and then you're out the money for the survey. So it's like,
right.
Are you willing to invest that money to pay the surveyor to go out there and still find yourself that you still have to do it anyway? So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So from a lender's perspective on flood insurance, the way we look at it is if any part of the property, we call it the improvements, are in the flood zone, then you're required to have it. And one of the things I don't think people realize is that you might buy a property today, it's not in the flood zone, but flood maps, they're not solid, right? They're static. They move. Every once in a while, FEMA comes out and remaps, and all of a sudden, one day, when you were not in a flood zone, you are in a flood zone, and there's not much you can do about that unless, again, if you think they're wrong, get the survey, prove it's out, file the LOMA. Otherwise, the lender's going to come back and say, "Look, you're in the flood zone. Need flood insurance."
Yeah.
Now, flood insurance can have a pretty big impact on the cost of insuring a home, and this is in addition to the homeowner's insurance.
Right.
I know this is all over the map, so I'm not going to hold you to it. Nobody out here is going to hold you to it. On average, what would you say you see? When you're seeing policies come through, what are we looking at? How little and how big can this be? And what we're on average. I know it's a huge range.
That is a huge range.
That's the disclaimer for you. It is a huge range.
So again, typically you're going to see if you're in a flood zone. You're going to see probably a range. I would say minimum of about $1,000, $800 to $1,000 maybe a year. That'd be on the very fortunate low range, up to, golly, I've seen quotes $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. So it depends what zone you're in, how much coverage you need,
size of the house and all that kind of stuff. So to say flood insurance is, it's not a choice you necessarily get. So if you're looking at purchasing a home that's in a flood zone, it's actually not your choice to get that policy. It's going to be required, and it can have a drastic impact on what your total payment is. So something to consider as you're looking at homes with your real estate agent is, particularly if you're looking at homes that you're a higher price in of your personal budget or what you qualify for, the lender's going to assume you don't have flood insurance. So that's a really key thing to take a look at. Now, just because you're not required to have flood insurance doesn't mean you don't necessarily want to buy it. There might be advantage. Like he mentioned, somebody hits a fire hydrant. That's not on a flood map, but that could cause some damage. Or even though you're not in a flood zone, so let's put it this way, I'm not in a flood zone, I get a flood. Does my homeowner's insurance cover anything?
No. So and that's on the spot again. Golly, I forget the percentage, but I think it's like 30% of homes that flood are not in a flood zone.
That's a lot.
Don't hold me to that percentage, but it is a extremely high number of homes that flood that are not technically in a flood zone. So
okay. Now imagine those policies are on the cheaper end when you're not required to have it and you get it.
Right. If you're in a flood zone X, so you're not in the 100-year flood zone. Again, that's your prerogative if you want to buy a flood policy, and then you're looking, $500, $600, $700 maybe, something like that. So a very in flood insurance terms, a very reasonable rate for getting some coverage, even though you're not required to have it by the lender.
Okay, so hey, just a quick little recap here. So flood insurance, it's a real thing. If you're buying a property and you're in a zone, you're going to have it. It is possible maybe to have a property that's in the zone and actually get it excluded by either getting a survey or something like that to show that the improvements are out of the property. And this is very common with properties that are on sloping hills around rivers and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to be close to water to be in a flood zone. And I actually need to talk about this. A house I had in Eugene was a neighborhood that no rivers anywhere, not close by at least. And fortunately, my house was out of the flood zone, but across the street, those houses were in the flood zone. So it's not like everybody's in the same bathwater. Some people are in, some are out. And again, that can change at any moment.
Right.
However, if you're also, just because you're not in a flood zone, if you happen to have a basement and you store valuables in the basement, a flood insurance policy might be something you want, because an honest flood is not something that's going to be covered by your standard homeowner's insurance. So is that about right to sum that up?
Yeah.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, hey, I appreciate your time again. Remember, if this video was helpful, make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe button. Throw your comments in the comment sections. If you have some additional comments on flood insurance or comments from other videos, I'd be more than happy to forward those on to Kevin and get those answered for you. And until next time, make it an excellent day.